I've been kind of chatting with y'all. You're a very stuffy group of people. No, I've enjoyed just kind of like chatting with you both here to begin, and I'd love to know, to start, how did this project start? How did this documentary begin for you all?
Derik, take the first hand.
Thanks, guys, for showing up tonight and hanging out with us. It's really great to see so many faces here, and I hope we do have an opportunity to open the floor for some questions. That would be fantastic. This film started, it's really actually quite incredible, right? This global pandemic thing we've had kind of compresses all the years. Like, what exactly was it, 4 years ago, 6 years ago? But it actually started in 2018, which was the scenario that, basically I'll paint the scenario. I had the opportunity to meet Sidney and spend time with him and his wife, Joanna, at their home in Beverly Hills, talk about some of the work that we've done, talk about the opportunity to work together to create a film on his life and his life story. And so that took a couple of months of conversations and talking about what we wanted to do and who might be the director. And by early 2019, we were in a position where we were ready to start moving forward and putting the film together. So that's when it all started.
You became a part of the project. Talk to me about that beginning.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. How y'all doing? How your mama doing?
I told you, very stuffy, right? Very stuffy.
So I get a call from Derik and his team, and they say, "Hey, we've talked with the family of Sidney Poitier, and they've given us the ability to make a movie about his life." And I knew that they had never been a documentary in the life of Sidney Poitier. So I had a kind of a dual reaction, right? One is excitement accepted, right? Of course. Because I also felt immediately very protective of that story because Sidney meant so much to me. And so much to the point where I didn't really understand how integral he was to my kind of my self-concept. He had always been a part of my life. We had always watched his movies, and beyond him as a great artist, he was kind of my, along with my own father, my definition of what a man was. So I was like, well, what if someone messes it up? What if someone doesn't tell every part of his story? Because you can't just go, what a great actor. Like, no. You have to talk about the activist. You have to talk about the filmmaker. You have to talk about all that he was. So I felt a great sense of obligation.
I'm intrigued because you talk about how much he meant to you, and that was actually one of the common themes of this film, is not just about the acting and not just about the awards and the accolades, but also like the inspiration, right? And the ways that Oprah talks about how seeing him change the possibilities for her. You talk about him meaning a lot to you. What did he mean to you? Like, how were you introduced to Sidney Poitier, and how do you look back at his life now having directed this piece on him?
He was always important to me, but of course, because I grew up with him in my life, I took him for granted. He was, he was always there. He was the standard, right? So you measure yourself against the standard consciously or unconsciously. But then, as an adult, you go, wait a minute, there was no obligation that he had to exist. There was no obligation that he would have to take on the responsibility that he did, right? Because so many people are like, well, I'm not a role model. But he knew what he was. He knew the assignment, and he accepted the assignment, and he accepted the weight and the slings and arrows that came from that assignment. And how many of us are willing to do the same?
I mean, I didn't expect a call to action here. Derik, what was your introduction to Sidney's story?
Well, I was just going to add, actually, if I may, just the way Reggie described what Sidney meant to him and that sort of what went through his mind about, it's got to be done right. It can't just be this. It can't be done that. Can you imagine, Reggie, because we talked about this and we thought about this at the beginning, can you imagine the responsibilities that landed on this man's shoulders to make this film? quite extraordinary.
I'm definitely going to ask about that in just a
Right?
moment. Yes.
It's incredible. My introduction to Sidney Poitier was as an 11-year-old boy sitting in my local theater, and I met Sidney Poitier on the screen in To Serve with Love. And it absolutely, I was just captivated. This man I saw a leader, I saw a teacher, I saw a man that was committing himself to these kids in this unruly classroom. And my mother tells a story that I came back fascinated by who he was and asking questions like, why can't I have a teacher like that? Why can't I have a coach like that? Why can't that be in my life? So that was my first introduction to Sidney, and it stayed with me forever.
The entire time I was watching this, I just wanted to see all of the unedited footage of the Harry Belafonte interviews. I was like, this has got to be some of the best tape that there is. And I'm curious, like, Belafonte and him and this relationship that they have, talk to me a little bit about what it was like having to tell that story and figuring out what to use and what and how to build a narrative there.
Well, I mean, I'm very fortunate in that my brother developed a friendship with Harry Belafonte, decades ago. So he's such a giving mentor and leader. So periodically, I've had conversations with Harry over the years. And one of the things when you get to Hollywood, you hear stories about them. And, they had a falling out. And, they don't like each other anymore. And then they're friends again. And for me, I was always on a mission, whatever I was doing, to honor those men whenever possible. So when I was at BET, I said, well, we need to give Harry Belafonte an award. So I would make arrangements and he'd get an award. And then I started doing the NAACP Image Awards. And I said, well, it's time I think we need to give Harry Belafonte an award. And then I realized that he was one letter short of an EGOT, right? He had a Grammy, he had a Tony, he had an Emmy. He didn't have an Oscar yet. So I said, we have to fix that. So I called a friend of mine who in the Academy. I said, we need to get Harry an Oscar. We need to, they do the honorary Oscars every year. He deserves it. He goes, you're right, Reggie. Good call. So he said, I'm going to work on it. I'm just this guy. There's a great phrase from George Clinton that says, I'm a positive nuisance. I go, that's me.
I can attest to that.
So it was radio silence for like a month or so. And then I get a call and they're like, it's done. And I'm like, yes. And then that year I ended up producing the Governor's Awards. So I said, that's great. So, they do little short films that, profile each person. So I got we made this short film about his life and then we had the band play. I say, play Mama Boo Boo when he comes out. Because I'm sure he's tired of Deo. Let's switch it up. And then, so we were in the rehearsal and music started playing. And he turned and looked at me and said, that's Mama Boo Boo. I go, I know. But the point is, I've seen the trick to honoring Harry Belafonte is that he always says the same thing. I'll only accept it if Sidney presents it. So I've seen them together again and again over the years. I remember one time seeing them both backstage. They're both in their tuxedos. They're both in director's chairs like this. And they were just sitting there. They weren't talking. They didn't need to talk. When you with someone that you love and you can just be in silence with them and it's not uncomfortable because it's all being said and no words are necessary. And when you see that moment between them, and you just go, these two men, this is the longest relationship in either of their lives. Right? Longer than the wives, longer than anything. The two of them broke together, sleeping on rooftops in Harlem, talking about we're going to make it in entertainment. You sleeping on a rooftop. How's that supposed to work? And they did it.
I think that's applause worthy. Yes. Derik, you have done a lot of documentaries that really tell the stories of people's lives. I Am is the title of many of them. And I'm curious, what was unique about telling this story, and what was familiar about the storytelling of like telling the life story of a person?
I think the unique aspect for me was, I'll just go back, was that there was this connection. Although I didn't know Sidney, there was this connection when I was a boy that lasted. I watched all of his movies growing up. There was a connection that I almost felt like, and you talk about your responsibility. When this started to come forward, I actually thought to myself, geez, can I, should I, can I make this happen? And quite frankly, I actually, to some ways, I hearken back to the fact that when I worked with Muhammad Ali and his wife Lonnie to do the movie Facing Ali, the great part about this sort of relationship that was established with Sidney and Joanna was that was a movie that they really loved. And so that kind of took me over the threshold. Yeah, I can do this. I can make this happen. So that was different because I'd worked with, many, families and estates and iconic individuals, but there was something about this that really, I kind of had to prove it to myself. And so once that trust, was put in place, then it was really about, well, boy, we got to put together the A-team, right? And Reggie, who had had experience with working before, him and I working together, that just made a lot of sense. And I got to say, not just from being a director and a director with vision, but a guy that could take on this responsibility, because it really is it's an incredible amount of responsibility. And you've seen the work, and you've seen the film, and all the way through, he was steadfast. In fact, you talked about Harry Belafonte. One of the first things that you said, Reggie, going back to just even discussions after we'd gone through and talked about Sidney specifically, was that what was really important to you was we needed to find this way where we could bring that relationship between the two of them forward and have it that continuing, sort of tributary through the film, because it was so important to you right at the beginning.
Yeah, it was important. I mean, I just knew how important it was for both of them. And, both of them are giants. So the idea that these two titans, loved each other, tested each other, all the complexity of that relationship. Because, you have friends and then you have siblings, right? You fight with your siblings, right? Because the love is that deep, right? And the complications of, well, are you committed enough to the movement? And how do you express that commitment? There's so many complexities to that relationship that I thought, well, that's really relevant. It's essential to their lives, but it's relevant to all of us, right? I just thought all that was really important. I also want to mention, when we first connected, it was actually, I was in one of their films. They did I Am Bruce Lee. I happen to be a bit of an expert on Bruce Lee. So they asked me to be in it because I had met Shannon, Bruce's daughter. And then she says, wow, you should be in the movie. I'm like, yes.
He didn't hesitate.
One of the things I think is really beautiful about this piece is there's just so much about the history, right, that I really think contextualizes Sidney in a really, really important way. Talk a little bit about how you figured out how to tell the story of the history attached to the moment that he came through.
I mean, for me, for a couple of things. One is, when you make these movies, what's great about Sidney is that he had such a long, fruitful life. And his life touched some of the biggest moments of the 20th century, quite frankly. So it's a way for us to explore American history. So you get to talk about the Cold War. You get to talk about the Red Scare. You get to talk about all these things. But to do that, you have to contextualize them. Because tragically, so many of our schools take the most interesting moments and just drain all the excitement out of them. So all of us as filmmakers put the excitement back in.
Be specific. What do you mean by those moments being drained out? How do you see that?
Well, we've all been in history class.
I know. Yeah.
You're like this. And then you go see a movie about the same thing. I mean, like, I remember when I showed my son Godfather 1 and 2. And he was like, okay, freeze, pause it. Okay, what's this? I said, well, this is the Cuban Revolution. Because you see the mobsters are working. And he was like, oh, okay, hit play again. And it took us 4 hours to get through the movie because he wanted to, he cared, right? So then he walked into history class like, I know what's really going on, right? And so I've always wanted to say, can we just teach American history via film? Because y'all are failing. So, I mean, so all that to say is, so for people who may not know any particular part, I mean, if you really want to understand the triumph of Sidney Poitier and the barriers he's breaking, you have to remind people what the times were like. So when you hear him talk about, you know, the extraordinary lack of resources he had, that he didn't have electricity, he didn't have running water. So you just go, okay, you had nothing except exactly what you needed. He had the parents he needed. They gave him the love he needed. They gave him the moral guidance he needed. And that was enough.
I love that you say that because I thought that just in the very first, I guess, act, if you will, we get this really beautiful way of understanding how he came into the world, right? And it kind of helped contextualize how he saw everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even him seeing the mirror for the first time and those kinds of things. I'm curious, what surprised y'all about like digging into his life and telling this story? What came up that you were like, wow, I did not realize that, or I would have never expected that?
The big revelation for me was Juanita, his first wife. Because we looked and we could not find an interview with her. Not in print, not on television. I'm not saying she never did one, but we're pretty good and we couldn't find it. Okay. So we were determined to talk to her. And finally, as we were wrapping up the movie, she agreed. And let me tell you something. She is a force of nature herself. She reminds me of, you know, you see those old profiles of Diego Rivera, and they go, you know, his wife paints too. That's who she is. Think about her. She's a black woman attending Columbia University in the 1950s. Okay.
Which is enough of a pause by itself.
Right,
Yeah.
you made history showing up. And then you met this man who became literate as an adult. And you saw what he could be. And you helped make him what he could be. And the power of that and that partnership, and when you see those children and how amazing all of them are, and when you see how they were able to make a big modern family, you know, with all those kids and the wives getting along, you just go, these are extraordinary people. We can't figure out how to do that today.
I'm gonna come to y'all for questions in just a moment, but Derik, I'd love to know like what came up in this process of making this film that you were like, wow, I did not expect to be talking about this, or I didn't expect to learn this.
There were so many different aspects of Sidney's life, but actually, I'm going to go back to what Reggie was just saying. You know, you get to that point in a movie where you're going, okay, we've got this. This is our rough cut. This is looking pretty good, and people are liking it. To Reggie's point, we wanted to film Juanita, but it wasn't just Juanita. It was also her three daughters, and Sidney's three daughters. So Sherry, Pamela, and Beverly. But COVID was in the way, and they didn't want to do any interviews when we were doing our filming, even though we had incredible strict protocols and all sorts of things, but it just couldn't work out. So here we are in the 11th hour. We've got a rough cut. We're working towards our launch at TIFF, the film festival, and we have a Zoom with Oprah, Reggie and myself and the team, and we're talking about the movie, and we're feeling pretty good about it. And we've gotten over the fact that we haven't been able to get in front of the cameras. And Oprah says, got to give it one more shot. I love the movie, but we got to give it one more shot. And so we rolled up our sleeves, and that one more shot turned out to be an incredible addition to this movie, as you've seen with Juanita and the three daughters. I mean, it just elevates the story and takes you so much deeper inside who the man is. So it was worth everything, absolutely everything. And a lot of the surprises that you asked me about were told by Juanita and his daughters.
It's almost like you guys are storytellers. Like you button that up real good. That was great.
We've been
Okay,
hanging out.
let's go to. Do we have any questions? I see with the hat right here. Let's speak up and make sure we can hear you.
I just want to thank you for making such a complete portrait of the man. I just realized that those of us that lived in white communities where we had no contact with blacks at all in our youth, because I graduated from high school in '66, and all through my late childhood and my young adulthood, he was such a force in actually introducing us that had no contact, that blacks were not any different than us. They were just people. And I didn't see him on the I just realized I didn't see him on the screen as a black actor. There was obviously some of his roles were about conflict of whites and blacks, but he was just another man. And that was central to me to why he was so successful, because we didn't see somebody that was foreign to us. We saw another man dealing with a problem. And I think that changed a lot of, I just realized it probably changed a lot of the response from people that hadn't had any contact prior to that. My community, I finally got a black student, a sophomore in my high school, my senior year. That's how lily white orange was in those days. And it was like I say, when the whole movement started to, the civil rights movement, it was probably, I want to say, empowered by him giving us a portrait of blacks as just people. And I thank you for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, and that's one of the reasons. I mean, that's why we had folks testify to Sidney's importance to the civil rights movement. There's a great line that says, "Yeah, he won an Oscar, but he should have won a Nobel Peace Prize too." Yeah. Because the fight is on many fronts, right? You can be on the front lines in Alabama, and you can be on the front lines in Hollywood, but it's still a fight.
I love that. I think we had another hand, and then I'll come to you. Yes, right here in the middle.
Hi. Firstly, it's a wonderful movie that inspires so many people. And I was really wondering, a man full of so much of character with great parents. I wanted to see what he did after he met them after 8-9 years later. Did he bring them back to LA, or how was their relationship? That was something that I was feeling that, I wanted to see that, how he gave it back to them.
So you're curious about his relationship with his parents when he returned back, because we talked about in the film there was a mention of like he felt a way about that for a long time, that he had been gone for so long. What kind of information were you able to find there?
Yeah, I mean, he took care of his family, as you can well imagine. He was a man who, and in fact, one of his daughters moved to Cat Island to help develop the island. So the commitment wasn't even just to his family, but, to the place that birthed him.
Did you have your hand? Yes.
So it's a two-part question. And the first one, you don't have to actually say what it was, because the question is, everything gets done in the editing room. Is there anything that was filmed that someone, including yourself, said, no, I don't think it would be a good idea to share this? And on the other token, was there anything that you wish that you could have included in it?
So essentially, what got cut, or what kind of felt like it was not appropriate to put in, and then what was the second piece of that?
And what do we wish?
And what do you wish you could have gotten?
Look, I mean, when I first got called about the project, I went to lunch with the family. And one of the things I wanted to clarify was, look, we're going to tell the whole story. And are you comfortable with that? Because That's the only way I can do it. For me, you only understand a hero if you take him off the pedestal and put him and stand next to him full height. And then you see how tall he really is. And I mentioned various things that might make them uncomfortable. And they embraced all of it. So once I knew I had the latitude to tell the whole story, that's what I did. I mean, the fact is, he's a great man. And for me to understand how great he is, you have to understand that he is a man. And, you know, we all have weaknesses, we have flaws, but his ability to work through those makes him great. In terms of what didn't make it in, yeah, I could make another hour worth of movie. I mean, he's a man who every year of his life is amazing. From his birthday, when he was born dead, doggone near. You know what I'm saying? So there is no year that was, well, nothing really happened that year.
Like we only got 2 hours in here, like
Yeah, in fact, I would say this is the second time I've done this because I did a movie a couple of years ago called The Black Godfather about Clarence Avant. Thank you. And when you tell stories about men like that, and you fit what you can fit in, you make the hard choices, you make the big boy decisions, and you finish the movie, and you go to a little period of mourning. Because we're kind of in a post-literate society. So this movie's going to be, at one point, maybe the primary text through which people know this person. And you just go, well, but there's more to tell. Wait, no, read this. Oh, look at it. And you just go, no, this is it. So I feel sad. I feel a loss because I do want to tell every little bit of minutia. But at the same time, it's got to work as a movie. If I'm going to get my son and daughter to watch this thing, it's got to have a certain pace and energy and a focus to it. Like you can't get lost in the weeds. So that's the grown-up decision making.
How long was your first?
How long was the first cut?
I was going to add that. I think it was a good 5.5 hours.
I would love as we wind down here. We lost Sidney earlier this year, and I'm curious how his passing impacted the piece or the way that y'all went about even discussing it, working on it. How did his passing impact this?
Well, the biggest thing is that we couldn't show him the finished film. So that was deflating. There was a little bit of a ratchet up of pressure, but there's no outside pressure that can be greater than the pressure I put on myself. I'm pretty brutal on me. So I was like, well, we got to do it. But we knew that going in. So I was okay. And just like Derik said, once we talked with Juanita and the daughters, it was like, oh yeah, we good now. Because they said things that no one had ever said. I mean, the thing about her turning in the fur coat and taking the money and investing and raising the son, how gangster is that?
It's such a great detail.
Oh my
yeah.
There's no fur coat. The confidence that comes from, I don't need this token. I know me, And her telling him how to negotiate the deal for, it's like, no. You're an investor. It ain't about, your value is less. It's no. Your value is big. And they need to recognize your value and get your money. And there's a lot of different business models for you to get your money.
I would say lastly, what do you hope that people will tell other people about this film?
Well, I just literally, it's very, just, you got to see it. Okay. Because here's the thing. I think there's 4 categories, right? There's must see, should see, could see, don't see. If you say, yeah, you know, you should see it, that's soft. You got to be, oh my God, that's a must see. When you hear that, you go, okay, that's a must see. I guess I must see it.
We started with a call to action and we end with a call to action. Make sure you tell people that you must see it. There you go.